started. So we're now recording. So everyone, welcome so much. We are glad to have you with us. I am Brooke Kent, and for those of you who don't know me, I have spent the last 20 years helping executives and professionals revise and rework and rewrite their resumes and LinkedIn profiles and interview answers. And you can find more about me at brookewritesIt.com. And for my guest expert for today's webinar, I have my good friend, Josh Perry. So Josh, would you mind introducing yourself to those who don't know you?
Yes, thank you again, Brooke, for having me on today. So as Brooke mentioned, my name is Josh Perry. I am a technical executive recruiter. I kind of split my time between both of those realms and have been in the recruiting space for just a little over 8 years currently. I do specialize in the engineering and IT space, though I'll say I've recruited on just about anything and everything throughout my career. And as an independent recruiter too, I kind of don't shy away from meeting many professionals or opportunities. So thanks again, Brooke.
Well, we are so glad to have you, Josh. And for anyone who might want to get in touch with you, if you say something, that piques their interest or they want to connect with you further, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Actually, the best way is LinkedIn. So
imagine that the topic of today's webinar, right?
Crazy enough, right? You can always email me, but I'll be honest, I get back to people on LinkedIn faster than I do to my own work emails. If you're looking for an email, josh.perry@empower.associates. That's the easiest one to catch me at. But LinkedIn really will turn you the fastest turnaround.
Great. Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. So before we get started, I want to cover our first question that we have before we even get into the 5 strategies. Let's talk about the question of, in today's world, does your LinkedIn profile even matter? So I am going to say, in my opinion, absolutely. Otherwise, why would we be doing this webinar? But, think of LinkedIn as your electronic billboard. And just like a physical billboard, an electronic billboard in the form of your LinkedIn profile makes a huge impact. So let me give you 3 statistics, and then we'll turn it over for Josh for his kind of anecdotal experience. So number 1, as Josh will tell you, 95% of recruiters use LinkedIn as their primary hunting ground. And the second, statistic that you should keep in mind is that a compelling LinkedIn profile will make it 27 times easier for a recruiter to find you. And then last, like the title of today's webinar suggests, a strong LinkedIn profile will actually make it 40 times more likely that you will land a new opportunity. So Josh, I know we've had a couple people join us while I've been talking. What are your thoughts? In today's world, does your LinkedIn profile even matter? And as a recruiter, can you share a story or an example that kind of illustrates the impact of people's LinkedIn profiles?
Absolutely. Absolutely. LinkedIn profiles are of the utmost importance to any job seeker, whether or not you are an active or a passive job seeker. At the end of the day, about 99% of working people are job seekers. We're always interested in hearing about what's out there, if not actively pursuing something. And right. To the 95% of recruiters utilizing LinkedIn, I would argue that 100% of good recruiters, people that are out actively technical recruiting, hunting people that are currently employed, most of that is getting done on LinkedIn. It's a crucial tool for being noticed and for finding talent.
Right. And, for the people who, are worried, is it too late for me to update a LinkedIn profile? Like, have I totally missed the boat? What would your advice, to those people be?
So that is something that I've actually heard from a number of people. We find a lot of the minority in the working world being those folks that have spent 8, 10, 15 years at a single company and haven't ever needed a LinkedIn profile. From my perspective, it kind of goes back to the old, planting a tree analogy. I'm trying not to butcher this here, right? But if I'm not mistaken, the best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago.
Yes.
The next best time is this very moment right now. And that's what LinkedIn is. The sooner you can get on it, the quicker you'll begin realizing what your professional network looks like and how many degrees of separation you really have from a lot of key influencers and decision makers all across LinkedIn.
And like you said, Josh, even if, we perhaps didn't jump on LinkedIn, a couple years ago, there's no time. Like the present, my husband loves to garden, and, the Japanese saying, when you plant a cherry tree is the best time to plant it was 25 years ago. But if you didn't plant it, then the next best time is today. Right. So,
Right.
So let us hop to our first strategy that we are going to talk about today. And again, for our guests, I emailed everyone a PDF notes handout that you are welcome to use as you take your notes. So let's go to our first strategy, which is attract attention. So what do we mean by that? How can you attract attention on LinkedIn? Well, we're going to talk about two ways. And the first is with your headshot, and the second is with your headline. So obviously a picture is worth 1,000 words, and you want to select a picture for your headshot that conveys that you are competent and likable. And just having the fact of having a headshot will increase your profile views on LinkedIn by up to 21 times. So Josh, let me get your experience as a recruiter who's been in this game for a long time. What is the most unusual or the funniest headshot that you have seen, just as an example for us of what not to do?
Oh, that's tough because it's kind of always going to be a toss up between, I've recruited a handful of engineers in my day that have used Looney Tunes characters.
Oh, okay.
I've seen Donald Duck, Daffy Duck. I've seen Bugs Bunny as a profile picture in a headshot. Right. And so those always catch me off guard. I find those a bit humorous, but probably more than that are the dated picture when I recognize, this was clearly 30-ish years ago, and your headshot or your profile picture on
maybe
LinkedIn.
They're rocking the 80s perm or, some questionable polyester fabrics, right?
Exactly. That or the picture of the picture. They've taken their cell phone and physically taken a picture of an old picture that looks good. Those are all things that I've encountered.
And of course, what I've encountered in helping people is, they're sharing a picture of their wedding or, their class reunion, and they've cut out the person standing next to him. So, of course, it becomes the 3-armed person, right? So,
yes, those are the selfies where they've taken it with their cell phone and they've set a terrible angle and they're looking down. And yes, all of those, they tend to run rampant.
So if that is what not to do, Josh, then can you tell us, for people who are on a limited budget, what are 2 simple things that they could do that would improve their headshot, and help them attract better attention to their profile?
Absolutely. So if you are on a budget and you're working with limited resources, nowadays we all have a cell phone that can take a pretty darn good picture.
Right.
And so, if you abide by the photography rules for taking pictures, right, there's the rule of thirds where you make sure you're lined up in the frame. There are simple things like lighting. If you can take those elements into it and then transpose yourself into, probably wearing something nice with a flat backdrop, anything that is showing a current relevant version of yourself, not an old version, not a picture of you with your friends in college or you in, your wedding tux or wedding dress, right? Any of those 2, the main 2 things being abide by the photography rules and look presentable and look relevant.
Yeah. And I would, add on to that, if you are on a limited budget, don't neglect, to ask a friend or a family member who's good at photography or enjoys that as a hobby, or even hit up, the person who takes your family photos for your Christmas cards and say, hey, what would it cost for 10 or 15 minutes of your time so I could get some headshots, and of course, there are great free photo editing apps. Google Photos is one if you want to turn it black and white or blur the background. Keep in mind that there are a lot of low-cost options that can still make your headshot look a lot better. So that brings us to the second part of attracting attention, which is the headline. And a lot of people don't know what the headline is. So the headline defaults to your current or most recent job title. It's right under, your LinkedIn headshot. It's 120 characters that you have to kind of convey the essence of who you are. So Josh, tell me, what are your thoughts on headlines? What is the good, the bad, and the ugly that you have seen here, and what could we do better?
So I am going to speak on behalf of myself, right? There is no one absolute silver bullet. There's just a bunch of lead bullets when it comes to LinkedIn. And from what I have found, the headline, if your intent is to draw attraction to to garner traction, to be noticed by recruiters or hiring managers, it is best to avoid trying to be silly. Don't put something silly in there, something, about being a, professional cat wrangler or
unless you're working at Joe Exotic Sue, right?
Exactly. Unless that is your actual title, try and be specific, right? You can make it sound better than it actually is if you really want to, but at the end of the day, know that recruiters are looking quickly at profiles, and one of the very first things they glance at is your name and title. And whatever you title yourself, if it's too convoluted, there's a likelihood you won't get clicked on.
Yeah, and tell me, about, situations you've run into where candidates maybe have a certain title at their company that does not translate well to the outside world, where it's very specific to their company, but it's hard for people outside that company to know what that title actually is. What is the value there in making that a little more generalized or hitting some better keywords?
Well, I knew a guy that ran a sales operation and it was in the staffing space, and his tagline was, "I've got people ... skills."
Okay.
And I remember getting some real feedback from one of our big clients after he left, that it actually took them 2 to 3 months to ever even respond to a sales pitch from this guy because his tagline was a little more unprofessional from that perspective. And so if clients view it from the outset as being a little more unprofessional, assume the same thing's happening with hiring managers and people, because they're visualizing you on their team.
Right. And I think a point we're going to come back to again and again on today's webinar is that we want to decrease the mental effort, that recruiters and hiring managers are having to put in. So whatever we can do to make their job easier, will make it more likely that you'll land a new opportunity. So let's go then to our second slide. And, for our second slide, we're going to talk about the summary section. So our key point here is to summarize your story. So the summary section is that text box that's at the top of your LinkedIn profile, just below your headshot and your headline. And that is your chance to explain and to sell the story of your career. So in this text box, you have 2,000 characters to connect the dots between where you have been in the past and where you want to go now. And especially if you are among the 83% of job seekers who want to pivot to something different, which many of us do in the course of our careers, then this summary section is your chance to put that transition and that pivot into context. So Josh, as a recruiter, I know that you have worked with candidates time and again who have changed directions or pivoted. So tell us, did a summary ever convince you to talk to a candidate who you wouldn't have otherwise because they put that transition or that pivot into context?
Most definitely. Most definitely. Very recently I reached out to a web developer because I noticed early on in this individual's career, they were a civil engineer. And that's not a transition you see many people make. And as I clicked on the profile, not only did I see this big transition and major career changes, but I also saw a summary section that explained the change in what role this person had as a civil engineer, the writing they saw on the walls related to the oil and gas industry, and why they made a transition into the web development realm. That information alone gave me insight on not only the type of engineer this person could be and the type of solutions they could provide, but also on what type of background relatability they have to industries that are more prevalent in a state like Oklahoma.
So picking up, on what you said there, Josh, the power of the summary section, like you talked about, is that this is the chance to give people the story, the narrative, the through line, of your career, and to make it easy for them to connect the dots between, why is Joe, who is an engine or a civil engineer, now a web developer, And what do those things have in common? Like, just speaking off the top of my head, if I was working with that guy as a client, I might say, let's put a sentence in at the start of the summary section that's like, I love to solve interesting and difficult quantitative problems. And over the course of my, career, I've applied that in civil engineering to start and then transition to web developing, We're trying to make it easy for them to connect those dots.
Exactly. We're selling a story. This is the modern version of the cover letter. I'll tell you, as a recruiter, I have never read a cover letter, but I have read a lot of summaries on LinkedIn. and they're giving tons of good information because they're telling your story.
Right.
And that story, oftentimes, I've reached out to people because in their summary, they talk about their hobbies and the fact that they enjoy hiking and fishing, and knowing that my clients enjoy the same things, I can already assume cultural fit based on some pretty basic info in the summary.
So, talk to us, as a recruiter or from the hiring manager side of things, what is one thing that people could do that would improve their summary sections besides filling it out, which a lot of people leave blank, but besides filling it out, what could they do? One thing to improve the summary section.
One thing is tell why, right? If you can summarize why relative to your career, why did I work at said companies below? Why did it make me the professional that I am today? Why am I a skilled professional that could work at your company, right? It's a place where you can brag about yourself a little bit. You can list and layer in accomplishments as well as those simple sections of personality relative to your hobbies, the, kind of that intro line about you. All of those things help people build the vision of who you are and why you should be a part of their team.
And like you said, Josh, a key thing, that can be a little uncomfortable for a lot of people in LinkedIn is that the product we are selling here is you, right, as a person. And so with the headshot, we're giving them a picture of you as a person. And here we're giving them the story of you. Like, what makes you tick? What are you passionate about? How do we connect the dots between these disparate, companies that you've worked at? And like you said, we are a story-driven people, right? Back to thousands of years ago, sitting around the campfire as hunter-gatherers to now we think in terms of story. So let's give people that story to make sense of your history.
Exactly. It's your sales pitch. When in sales, they teach you to, sell to the individual as though they can sit and hear what you're saying and visualize your product, your service, making their life easier, taking work off their plate, simplifying their day. When your LinkedIn profile is done correctly, that's what you are doing. You are selling yourself to prospective employers as to why you could come in and make their team work more cohesively, take more of their workload off of the team, or just simply fill a gap that's needed.
Right. And that is such a perfect transition, Josh, to our third strategy that we are going to talk about here, which is kind of the meat of today's webinar. So in this strategy, we're going to talk about relying on results, not responsibilities. So here we are talking about the experience section where you're outlining your experience working at companies A, B, and C. And let me tell you that your profile will receive 29 times more views if you have more than one position listed here in your experience section. So let me talk a little bit and then we will turn it over to Josh. So in 20 plus years of helping people rewrite and revise their resumes and LinkedIn profiles, I can tell you that this is the make or break section, that will determine, how well your job search goes. And the number one error that I see people making in this section is that they focus on responsibilities rather than results. So what do I mean there? Well, say we have candidate A, and candidate A focuses on responsibilities, and for their job, they say, I was responsible for overseeing employee productivity. And then candidate B takes that same, job, that same position, but they shift the focus to results. And they say, I increased employee productivity by 7% by building and tracking 5 productivity metrics so that I could mentor and coach employees on how to be more productive. I think the answer is clear to all of us on which candidate we would interview and hire. And it's the one that focuses on results rather than responsibilities. So Josh, let's talk, from your end as a recruiter and from the hiring manager side of the table. What are your thoughts on this fundamental mindset shift between responsibilities versus results? What impact does that make on you as a recruiter in terms of which candidates you want to talk to?
I think it's massively impactful because, if you can speak to the results, right, once again, you're speaking to why. There's a great Simon Sinek talk where he talks about, Apple sold to people, not here's a 20 gigabyte iPod, but here's a chance to hold every song you've ever held in your pocket.
Right.
And when we're talking about our skills and we're talking about our results, we're talking
Right.
about why, right? We're giving that visualization to the employer of what we can come in and accomplish. And
Right.
more than that, we're setting an expectation for ourselves.
Mhm.
If we don't talk about results, we set no expectation for what we're capable of accomplishing in a work environment. And
Right.
we leave a lot of that up to the individual interviewing us to assume.
Now,
Right?
talk to me, Josh, because I'm sure you get clients where you might not have talked to them except for the results they listed here. Maybe their title was something that wouldn't have popped up in your search, but the keywords in the experience section as they're listing their results and their accomplishments, are what brings them to your attention. So, talk to us about, when that happens, what the power, the impact of that is.
Absolutely. There are the problem with titles is they're only as good as the company with which they're associated. Your
Right.
title at one company could be a different title at another company, and your responsibilities may be relevant to 3 different titles at another
Right.
company. The results are really what pulls back to which responsibilities did you have and how did they
Mhm.
impact the company. I've seen people that because they haven't worked at a number of different companies. Very recently, I had an individual that was performing the work of what would be a data analyst or business
Uh-huh.
intelligence individual, business analyst. But at his company, he was a Six Sigma black belt. And that was
Okay.
the title, Six
And I'm
Sigma.
guessing that wasn't what your keywords were that you were putting in on your search terms, right?
None of them, none of the keywords, because in his company, it was very manufacturing driven engineering firm. And so
Mhm.
all of the keywords associated with his title and the work that he was performing related to his responsibilities, not the results and the things that he was actually accomplishing from them. They sounded very, very manufacturing. And then the truth was, this guy was a great data analyst.
Right. And so then what was the impact once you got, those results out of him from talking to him? Were you able then to place him in a position that was actually, what he might have been interested in?
Oh, absolutely. And probably more than even the placement process was that reality to him of all of the effort that he had put in with through applications and why
Right.
he was getting so many jobs that he wasn't interested in. Why
Right.
he was getting hit back so many times. A lot of people don't realize that recruiters, we're only as good as the other roles we've ever recruited on in the past. That's the only way we develop relatability. Outside of that, we rely on keywords.
Hmm.
And
And
if
so
you
peel back the curtain for us, because I know that most people may not be aware of how the LinkedIn search engine works, for you as a recruiter or a hiring manager. What is the value of people, listing those results or accomplishments or metrics that they achieved and incorporating those keywords in kind of an organic and natural way? How does that affect how they fall in your search results?
Well, it's very similar to how search engine optimization works with
Mhm.
Google. In that, if you are a website that talks about baking and your primary type of baking is chocolate, then
Okay.
you need to have baking and chocolate in your website a lot or
Right.
words similar to it so that it shows up on the first page.
Hmm.
Same thing goes with recruiting. When I'm recruiting and I build a Boolean string utilizing specific keywords,
Right.
if those keywords are associated with your profile more often, and if
Uh-huh.
they're close enough to the results section, right? If you used a technology or a tool,
Right.
and here are the results from that,
Mhm.
recruiters are going to see that and you'll populate higher on the search for
Mhm.
the recruiters. So they'll reach out to you faster.
Right, and same thing, right, Josh, for, the, what mid-size or large companies use, in terms of an applicant tracking system, which is basically the software that they use to go through and scan resumes that they're receiving, for, profiles or openings, does it work the same way pretty much for those?
Very, very similar, right? Never believe if you have to say to yourself, oh, well, surely the recruiter will know what that means.
Right.
There's a 99.9% chance they do not.
Well, because for instance, you're not a Python programmer yourself, right? So you're relying on keywords that the client is giving you that these are some things, that should be in a good candidate's profile.
Exactly. When I see Lean Six Sigma Black Belt listed as your title, it
Right.
doesn't matter that I see things like Tableau or requirement gathering, I've seen Six Sigma black belt. And because the only manufacturing engineers I've ever recruited needed a Six Sigma black belt, well, now in my mind, you're a black belt and you're a manufacturing engineer, because those are the only two dots I've ever connected as a recruiter. And I'm working off of keywords alone.
Right. Now, talk to us, Josh. What is the value, for, people to put in the work to actually try and quantify or put a specific number to their results, going that extra step, not just of listing the result or accomplishment, but trying to quantify it or put a number to it in some way?
I think it gives you, it's similar to watching film. I remember as an athlete, right? Whenever you talk about experience and relatability, an athlete can sound great on paper, but when you watch them play their sport, you get a different feel for how good that athlete is.
Right.
Well, people can't watch you do your day-to-day job. That's the reality. So the closest thing they can have to that are those results, not what you were doing, but what happened after you did it. If you managed a $500 million project, that's great. But did it land? Did it finish on time? Did it come in under budget? What was the end result of the product launch, and how did it impact the company long term?
Right. And just like you said, it's putting into context the impact of your result, right? Because there's a big difference between you just performing your job versus, in an inflationary environment, you cut, packaging costs by 5%, and those were your biggest contributor to your company's cost of goods sold, right? And so then we're helping the recruiter and the hiring manager connect the dots between, Sally did this for this company, I bet Sally can do that for me.
Exactly. You're allowing other people to make positive assumptions on your behalf.
So talk to us, Josh, because I know that there is a cost associated to a company, hiring an individual. How do these numbers, impact the company's decision on whether or not to make that investment?
It's a great question. Depending on the company, depending on the environment, the ramp, the state, there's a lot of factors that play in. But generally speaking, whatever you and your salary is, you can estimate about 8 to 12% of that the company is eating on top of paying you what they're paying you. Right. And that's where they're going to cover things like ramp ups for training. That's where it's going to cover that 4 hours you're not working because you did a team building event on a Thursday afternoon. Right. That's where they're covering some of the benefits, some of the FICA, unemployment, Medicaid, all these things on the back end. And the biggest one being the first one I mentioned, which is training. Right. And if I have to invest my time in you, that's time I'm not spending doing my job and you're not spending doing your job.
And so in terms of being willing to make an investment, do you think hiring managers are more likely to pull the trigger when they have some quantifiable metrics from what Joe or Sally did in the past then?
Absolutely they are. Anything that allows them, that gives them that confidence, that comfortability, and the solution that's being provided, you, the individual, being that solution, right? When they see that you have cut costs by 5% and manage this product over the course of an 18-month rollout, and they think, wow, we have a big, huge rollout coming up in 3 months. It would be really beneficial to have someone like this, even just to be able to give feedback on what they encountered.
Right. So let us go to kind of our fourth strategy that we are going to talk about, which is at the skills section, which if you're looking at your LinkedIn profile would be after the experience one. So let's talk about how to spotlight your skills. So should you bother listing skills? Yes, because if you list at least 5 skills on your profile, it will increase your profile view by by 17 times. And not only that, but you will get 31 times more messages from recruiters if you have those skills listed on your profile. So just as a global, tutorial on skills, LinkedIn breaks them down into 4 buckets: industry knowledge, tools and technologies, interpersonal skills, and other skills. And note, if you're not aware, that you can reorder or pin those skills. So you can select the top 3 skills that you want to feature at the top. You can reorder the skills within each strategy or within each section. So Josh, I know as a recruiter, you've seen the gamut of LinkedIn profiles. What is the most unusual or strangest skill that you have seen listed here?
I love this question because when I first got into recruiting, I realized that you can endorse people on LinkedIn for things such as sword fighting.
And I assume
Or
they're not Olympic fencers or something who are listing.
exactly. Exactly, right? There's like high-fiving, there's like friendship, and there's all these silly things. And so, that was a joke, an ongoing joke, I think, between a lot of recruiters for a long time, just constantly endorsing our friends for silly things.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, probably a lot more relatability to cat wrangling to the individual at Joe Exotic part.
So then tell us, if, all laughs aside, we should probably avoid those silly skills because we want to come across as professional and, someone that would be a professional asset to this company. What do you think are the impact of the skills section to you as a recruiter or hiring manager? And what could people do, to kind of improve that section?
I think that's a great question because a lot of people will underutilize that section, not realizing the importance that it has. And in my mind, it really speaks to two things. One being the technologies that you associate with or the responsibilities and stuff that you're utilizing or doing most frequently. And not just that you couldn't put that in your experience, but rather LinkedIn has a very honed in and directed type for each one of those skills. So it can't be misinterpreted. And as a recruiter, when I go to search for people that have very specific skills, now I can utilize this pre-built list of skills that you've associated with LinkedIn. So it doesn't matter if I misspelled the skill or if we use a different acronym relative to the technology.
So LinkedIn will kind of bucket, the 3 different ways someone might describe, machine automation, into the same, keyword that you're going to search for.
Absolutely. LinkedIn makes all that way easier.
So as people are thinking, maybe they haven't, paid a lot of attention to their skills section, should they be listing 20 skills, 100? Should they focus? What are your thoughts as a recruiter?
I think as long as you hit on the big 3 to 5 things that you can absolutely hang your hat on, things that you don't feel bad about asking other people to go and validate your skills and abilities to, people that are going to be willing to endorse you are probably the people you've worked alongside. And hopefully they're also the people that are going to have the easiest time endorsing you for the things you did best in your role.
So, for instance, if someone was an accountant, maybe you'd want to see them focus on, GAAP principles and P&L analysis and financial forecasting, and then, focus their efforts on reaching out to colleagues or coworkers or bosses and saying, hey, would you mind endorsing me on these 3 skills? Because those are the ones that are going to be really relevant to a recruiter or hiring manager search.
Absolutely. A salesperson's going to want to, if a salesperson comes from a background of inside sales, then they want endorsements for account management and mushrooming accounts, etc. Right? These are the things that if I'm looking at and I see exactly what it is, once again, I can visualize what you're capable of because I've seen 75 people have given you the thumbs up that you're capable of account management.
And so for people, who don't know a lot about endorsements, then it sounds like you as a recruiter and hiring managers kind of use that number, beside the skill, which indicates number of people who've endorsed you, as it's kind of a testimony to the fact that, yes, Karen really does know what she's doing in this area.
Absolutely. There are layers of it that are a testimony as much as it kind of brings back to that SEO mentality, right? The more endorsements you have, if I run a search and say a technology like Java is a requirement and you have a 99 plus endorsement rank, you're going to show up higher on that list than someone with a 75 endorsement rank on Java.
So that leads us naturally to the 5th strategy that we're going to talk about, which I kind of refer to as the extra credit section, of our 5 strategies that we're going to share. So in this one, we're talking about using your CAR, C-A-R, to lap the competition. So we're going to talk about each letter in turn. So C here is for content. And clearly, you can position yourself as a thought leader in your field if you write an article on LinkedIn or a series of articles. And so, to write an article, if you don't know how to do that, you go to the LinkedIn homepage, and then at the top under Start a Post, you click on Write an Article. And then that takes you to LinkedIn's article creation page, where you can add a headline and art and graphics and content. And then kind of the number one question I get, for clients where I'm working with them on revamping their LinkedIn profile, and they do want to position themselves as a thought leader in their field by writing some content. They're like, Brooke, what do I even write about? Like, it's the number one question, that writers have to solve. And so I always tell them, well, ask yourself, Jerry, in the last few months, what was the most interesting question that you've gotten about your work? And then that can be the topic, for your article, and sharing the answer to that. Maybe someone asks, well, how did you launch a new service, when COVID-19 forced your entire organization to pivot? Or how did you maintain client connection and client loyalty when we were all trapped at home and you couldn't do the normal things that you did to nurture those relationships? So let me turn it over to you, Josh. I know that most people aren't aware that they can write an article on LinkedIn. So when you run across a candidate who has written, an article or some content on LinkedIn, what tends to be your impression of them? What impact does that make?
It's always positive. And from my perspective, any type of effort like that, that's intentional in nature, meaning you're trying to contribute to your industry, to a hobby of yours, to something you care about. Right. That's positive. As long as you're not negative, as long as you're not, speaking negatively about your employer.
I did working at IBM or something.
Exactly. LinkedIn is not the place to post articles where you go on a 6-paragraph rant about how upset you are at IKEA.
Give us, easy, suggestions, what might people be able to write about, in times like these, is writing articles reserved just for people who are CEOs and about to retire, or can this be tackled by any level of person?
This can be tackled by any person, Brooke. And I think that's a great question, because a lot of people expect that other people will just put out good content. And the fact of the matter is that everyone that's putting out good content consistently on LinkedIn started by just putting stuff out there and seeing what would happen from it.
Right. Maybe they're like 5 things I learned by working in my garage or something, right?
Exactly. And a lot of people get started because someone asks the same question a handful of times. And instead of re-answering that question, they write an article, right? What do you do? What's the difference in what you do and what this other person does? What problems do you solve? Or maybe people in your workplace are asking you questions that you would assume to be common knowledge, and you're realizing they're not. Whatever they are, it's like Google. No matter what question you have, if you Google it, someone else has asked that question on a forum somewhere.
Right. And this is, like you said, an easy way to build your reputation, not only as a thought leader, but as someone who's willing to put in the extra effort, to do that. And I think employers, they may never click and read your entire article, but by the fact of having it there, they think, gosh, Brenda is willing to invest the extra time, to do this, surely she's going to do the same thing and make that same investment of effort into her career here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that brings us to the A part of our acronym for CAR. So A here stands for attachments. And so a lot of people don't realize that LinkedIn supports rich media, which means that you can add attachments to 2 different areas of your LinkedIn profile. So the first part you can add it under is on your experience section under each position. And then the second part is on the featured section at the top of your profile. So what are examples of attachments? So it could be PDFs. It could be articles you've written, whether that's on LinkedIn, your personal blog, community newspaper, an industry newsletter. Maybe it's articles about you. Maybe there was a company newsletter about a big project that you landed. Maybe you sat on a conference board and they had an industry newsletter about, the impact of that board. Maybe if you're in an engineering or technical field or the science arena, maybe it's white papers. that you've written or published. Maybe if you're kind of more on the graphic or design or writing end, it's, images, it's a link to your personal portfolio. Maybe it's videos, maybe it's you giving a talk at a local TEDx event or an industry presentation. There's all different types of attachments that you can include. And let me turn it over to Josh. Josh, as a recruiter, what types of attachments tend to make a difference, or add the most value? And, what is the impact of those attachments on someone's profile?
So that's a great question, Brooke, because I think a lot of people it kind of comes back to that results over responsibilities mindset. Sometimes it's really hard to, write on paper that you make beautiful documents. But if you have a portfolio showing PDFs of documents you've created for events that you've hosted, it changes the way that people read, I make beautiful documents.
Right. Because they can see actual examples, right? Like you said, they're kind of seeing the film for what you've done for past employers.
Bingo. It's so much easier to visualize what type of athlete you are when I watch you play your sport. Rather than when I hear you talk about playing your sport. And so whenever I see a portfolio, web developers, for example, that's a sport. I mean, I call it a sport because it's production. It's a profession that a lot of people will do at work and then come home and do their own side projects.
And so has there ever been a difference when a candidate has had attachments versus candidates who didn't, where that made a difference, in their job search?
Absolutely. Great question. Recently I had a search where a client was interviewing for a relatively junior web developer. And so that we had 3 candidates in the mix. 2 of them had college degrees, university CS degrees. And one of them, he had gone through a coding academy, which is like a 4-month boot camp. They teach you the basics. But through that, he was really interested in web development, had been beforehand. So he had been contributing to his GitHub profile consistently. He had web applications that he had built for fun, for friends, just to try and solve their problems. At the end of the interview process, when they were choosing between the 3, they loved all 3 personalities. But because he had a GitHub profile and a portfolio full of work that he had done on his own and in his free time, they went with that candidate, knowing that he's more passionate simply because he had more examples of the things that he did.
And he went to the effort of including those examples so that the employer didn't have to try and read his mind that these examples were out there, right? Because we're trying to make the hiring manager or the recruiter's job easy.
Exactly. He was even as comfortable as to reference his attachments and things. And like, when I used this technology to build this application that you see in my portfolio.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about the last letter and then we'll open it up for questions. So the R here stands for recommendations. And so when other people recommend you on LinkedIn, it's kind of the step beyond the skill endorsement, right? And we're validating the depth and the breadth of what you've done. And if you don't have LinkedIn recommendations, what you need to do is scroll down to the bottom of your LinkedIn profile and then next to the word recommendations, click on ask for a recommendation, and then you fill in the name of a boss or a coworker or a client from whom you want to request the recommendation. And then here is the key point that I give people that I work with. You need to delete the generic message that pops up and replace it with a personalized message. Maybe you say, "Hi, Sally, I'm updating my LinkedIn profile, and one of my goals is to get a few recommendations. I was wondering if you'd be willing to help me. Could you write a brief recommendation, regarding my experience with X? And then for X, you need to list a specific skill or project or goal or milestone that person worked with you on." And then, of course, you close the message by offering to help them return, in return, maybe you say, "I'd be happy to return the favor, and write you a LinkedIn recommendation as well." So let me turn this back over to Josh. Josh, as a recruiter, how much weight do you attach to recommendations? And what is one thing that people could do to improve in this area besides getting some recommendations in the first place?
Yeah, no, I think it's an area that a lot of people forget about, but it carries a lot of weight. I attach a lot of weight to it because as a recruiter, I can only speak to a fraction of what you're capable of doing, but your last boss or your last colleagues can speak to a much deeper and wider depth and breadth of your capabilities related to your next role.
So as a recruiter, then you're kind of using those recommendations as like a validation or a cross check that this person really is as good as they say they are, right?
Absolutely. It's a big part of it. If I catch them and I see relevant, right? I see a director of software talking about a software engineer and the impact that person had to a project or to the team whenever they were in place, I feel a lot more confident about that person just simply because, I'm putting my tag on this person to say they're good. And most people will not go out of their way to put their stamp of approval on something that is not high quality as a product.
Right. And of course, if that hiring manager, is working in a fairly small industry, they may know the person who's, giving the recommendation. They may say, well, if Joe thinks highly of this person, then, Sally's got to be great. Right.
Absolutely. It is the longer you stay in your industry and your profession, the smaller the world will get. You will know and know and know more and more and more people. And very recently, I was talking to a hiring manager about some resumes. And one of the candidates I mentioned, this individual's reference was this person at this company, and they said a ton of amazing things about this person. The hiring manager says to me, well, I actually knew that person through a friend of a friend, and they said they were kind of tough to get along with. So if they spoke that highly about someone, they must be really good.
Right. And I think, one more thing, I know that you've also given recommendations, for colleagues and coworkers that you've worked with. What, is there something that makes it easier for you to actually write that recommendation and hit the send button? What can people do to make it easier to actually get people to write and post those recommendations?
Yeah, so the people that I love the very most are the ones that ask me for a recommendation and then give me some sort of outline for what it can be, right? Maybe not verbatim, hey, here's what I want you to say, but I'm looking to get some help. I'm trying to spruce up my LinkedIn profile. If you could leave a recommendation similar to this, feel free to add, remove, fix, but just give them an outline for what you're looking for in that recommendation. Then it's up to them. If they believe in what you've said to them and they see that as something that you bring a valuable, that they could refer you out to, they'll be glad to put it on there. And it takes away a lot of the effort by them having to come up with. Exactly.
Right. Instead of saying, could you recommend me? And they're trying to scroll through 10 years of your shared history. If you're like, could you recommend me for, my expertise in, GAAP principles, financial forecasting, P&L analysis, then their job got a lot easier to actually write that recommendation.
Exactly. It's really easy if you just want them to endorse you for a couple skills like we talked about earlier, because that's a yes or no request. Can you help me by endorsing me for these skills? But if you want a referral, a reference down at the bottom, give them some semblance of what you are hoping that they will say on your behalf.
Right. Make their job easy. So let's go to our questions part. So we've saved the last 12 minutes for questions. We've got 2 questions in the chat. And then, of course, feel free, our guests, to unmute yourself and ask a question or to drop that into the chat, and we will make sure we get back to you. So Amin has a question. He says, do you think, Josh, that it's better to say, for example, front-end developer as a skill, or add specific things like HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, JavaScript, React, etc.?
I think that it's good to have both. I think that saying you're a front-end developer is great, but what kind of front-end developer, that's where it's most relevant to go in and talk about the skills that you utilize to build applications on the front end.
Okay. And then I would, tag on to what Josh said. Make sure that you're also incorporating those keywords organically into the results section under your experience, because the more we can organically get those relevant keywords in, the higher up you are going to pop on those search results, and you don't want to make the mistake that some people do where they use the summary text box just to dump 50 keywords without connecting them into a story, because LinkedIn is pretty smart, and that's not going to bump you up as high in the search results as will kind of incorporating them organically and naturally into the various areas.
Absolutely.
So Judith has a great point, and she says a great way to get recommendations is to give recommendations. And so if you reach out to those you appreciate and thought were doing great work, and you give them a recommendation, then, she says, that reciprocity principle, then chances are they're going to return the gesture.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen that time and time again. I've seen it personally and for other people. It's a really easy way. If you go ahead and give them a reference, the nice thing is if you leave a reference on a page too, it doesn't just automatically post, right?
Right.
They have to approve the
Mhm.
reference and the message. So they have to read it and then actively add it to their page.
Right.
Great point, Judith. Way easier to ask for that return favor.
And so we've got another question here from Randy. So he says, Josh, you say you never read cover letters, but I've often seen that cover letters help. Is that a difference between when you're working with a hiring manager versus a recruiter? So what are your thoughts here?
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. So when we talk about working with a hiring manager, they care a lot more about that story. As a recruiter in an agency environment, my job is to uncover that story and not count on paper to tell the story, right? Because I'll be the person telling the story to the hiring manager. But when we're talking about working with HR departments and hiring managers, direct applications, a cover letter is never going to hurt anything. A
Right.
cover letter is always beneficial.
I think the statistic I've seen, Randy, is that about half of hiring managers will not look at a cover letter, but half will and will read it very carefully. And so I think, like Josh said, it will never hurt. And it may help a lot because it gives you that chance to once again craft that narrative or that story to connect the dots between, what you did in the past and, what their problems are, that you would love to have a chance at solving. So giving you another chance to tell that story.
Exactly. The absence of the cover letter from an agency recruiter is more so, I'm going to read the about me section and the summary information after I've already determined you've got the skills on your resume or on your profile. You've worked at the companies that I know have relevant working experience, but now maybe I've got 20 messages to send and 60 candidates to go through.
Right.
And so the ones that I read that summary, I'm going to go, okay, this person's getting a message. This person is not. This person is, this person is not.
Okay. And so, I guess one easy way to think about it is there's probably going to be some common threads between your summary section on LinkedIn that recruiters are looking at and a cover letter or cover email that you're sending directly to hiring managers. And the important part of the common piece there is that you want to craft that narrative or that story, for them of what the overarching through line is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are there any other questions from any of our other attendees who are still with us? I know a few people had to drop off for other meetings or end of their lunch break, but any other questions before we finish up here?
Hi, Brooke. It's Karen. I'd like to ask a question.
Of course. Hi, Karen. It's a pleasure to see you.
Hi, Brooke. It's so good to see you. Hi, Josh. Thank you guys for these really helpful tips. My question is around a complete career change. So I was a corporate executive for 20 years, and then I left corporate to become an entrepreneur. And some of my entrepreneurial work is along the same lines as my corporate job, but some of it is completely different in a completely different industry in a completely different way. And I'm in the middle of like rebranding, updating resumes, and I feel like I'm confusing people right now about what I do. And I am switching from looking for jobs to looking for clients.
Okay. And so you're wanting to build your client base as an entrepreneur, then is that kind of what direction you're wanting to take the career?
Right. And I feel like because I have a really rich base of LinkedIn connections that I have not offered my business to yet, I need to be able to update my profile so they still remember all the great work I did in corporate where I built a great reputation, but that they're also excited about potentially engaging with the new.
Sure.
So any additional tips for me besides that great summary?
I think when I'm working with clients, who are making a career pivot, which as I, have mentioned a couple of times in the presentation, I think 83% of people at some point make a career pivot. So this is a very common thing that job seekers, will happen to most of us at some point in our life. So I would go through your LinkedIn profile and think, with the idea that you want to make the pivot into more of the entrepreneurial side, what are kind of the areas of your experience section that you might want to rewrite to highlight more of those skills, that they would value in an entrepreneur or consultant, or, whatever kind of direction you're focusing on. So you can kind of tailor a little bit of the narrative of your past positions. And then in your most recent position, for your entrepreneurial role, you want to highlight, bringing those skills from corporate America, into my, role in helping clients, with these XYZ issues, and also, like Josh said, kind of address that in your summary section. Josh, what are your thoughts for Karen as she's kind of making this pivot?
It's all sales. And that's the thing that I love the most about LinkedIn is LinkedIn is always giving us a chance to, there's always a seller and there's always a buyer. And whether I'm the buyer as the hiring manager, I'm the buyer as a prospective client, or, I have that ability to sell myself to that individual. And so if I'm pivoting into more of an entrepreneurial realm, that sales pitch now may not be reaching out to hiring managers about what a great employee you are, but you're making the same ROI-based statements, right? What is this return on the investment, you and me? What this relationship and the investment therein? And that can be a multi-step thing, where it's completely rewritten the entire summary to repitch or kind of reframe yourself and change the way you're being framed in those people's mind, followed by, an outbound campaign system with a message template that's, equal parts. Hey, I knew you when we worked together, to look what I'm doing now. And this is the expectation moving forward of what I could do for you to make life a little easier.
And like Josh said, help them connect the dots. Maybe, in corporate America, your strength was, exceeding customer expectations by delivering the product every single time, no matter how hard it was to get, and so that's an easy connection to make, to the service you want to deliver them, as an entrepreneur. I think the great thing about LinkedIn is it's not static. It's kind of a living, breathing organism. And so the way you present yourself today does not have to be the way you presented yourself 10 years ago, when you were kind of in that corporate environment.
I think I agree. Those are super helpful. So one last question.
Sure.
I'm on a couple of boards of directors, and both are volunteer positions, but they have great titles that allow me to really showcase that I am still growing as a person, and that I am still interested in serving on other boards. Even though I'm an entrepreneur, I'm not limited like I was in my corporate job, where I had non-disclosures, where I couldn't serve in certain ways. And so is there a way to highlight that those are the quality of those boards, like where it adds to your entrepreneurialism, but it doesn't confuse people as to what you do?
Sure. I mean, you could certainly add them as subpoints under your current, experience, and maybe you rebrand your position title. Maybe you say your principal, and board member, and then on LinkedIn, you can Google for the Unicode, which is like the HTML code to make a bold thing underneath that title. And so maybe one thing is like principal or owner, for your entrepreneurial side, and another is like board member, American Red Cross or whatever the board is, if it's a big deal, and then have some bullet points under that. I always encourage people, most people aren't aware that you can do bullet points under your experience section. You just need to use the Unicode HTML code, to do that, to make it a little easier visually. So Josh, what are your thoughts kind of on Karen's question?
Yeah, I'm right there with you, right? I think, life's what you make it. And the same goes with your working experience. I've seen resumes that said, self-employed, or they had a company listed with an LLC that was an independent LLC. And then underneath that, they list in their, working with the PTA, managing, like all of these random responsibilities that do maybe even have a workload responsibility to them, right? They are getting paid on, but they're not directly a W-2 job or responsibility. Those things are still fine to mention, because once again, you're selling it,
Mhm.
right?
I think Josh, like Josh said, the key is put it in context, give some numbers or some quantifiable metrics to speak to what's the impact of this board, what kind of budget does it have? How many people is it serving across how many counties or states or whatever? Give people a way to see that this really is a big deal, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Both of them are
Yeah.
national organizations and one is a local. And so I like the idea of going ahead and putting like the impact, like how many people we serve
Yes.
and the budget, because it is using all the skills we have. It's volunteer positions.
Right.
versus,
And like Josh said, you get to choose how you sell yourself. But I think if you give people the metrics or the numbers to understand the impact or the scope of those, then that's, really helpful. Are there any final questions from anyone else before we wrap things up here? Okay. Well, I think that, unless anyone wants to jump in with a final question, I think we've addressed the questions for now. Of course, we know that questions may pop up for you as soon as we hang up here. So, of course, feel free to reach out to Josh. He's at josh.perry@empower.associates, or you can reach out to me. I'm Brooke at brookewrightsit.com, or you can find me on my website at brookewrightsit.com. I will email each one of you a link to today's recording once it's available, and the infographic that I promised you that kind of summarize a few of the key takeaways. Josh and I are so grateful for the time that each one of you took to attend today. If we can, either one of you, be of service to any of you as you're either job searching or as you're not job searching, but you're just thinking about how can I, better present myself, to grow for the next level in my career, Josh and I are always happy to be a resource, and we thank all of you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys, and thank you, Brooke.
Thank you so much, Josh, for joining us. Well, I will be trying to run a series of these about once a month on different topics with different guest experts. So I hope you all can join me next time. I will send you all an email when I've got the next one on the books. But Josh, thanks for your time today. And we wish each one of you the very best in your career and your job search. And if we can be a resource or of assistance to you, please let us know.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
You guys, take care. Bye.